Hi, today is January 6th, 2018. I'm Matthew Worley along with Joey Reynolds, and also joining us is Randy West, and we are here in Los Angeles, California, and we are all three members of Pacific Pioneer Broadcasters. Joey Reynolds, thank you so much for taking time to talk with us. First question, may I ask you, sir, what was your full legal name at birth?
Joseph Pinto.
And what was your birth date?
July 7th, 1939.
And what were your 1939, so this is pre-television, of course. What were your first memories of radio?
I think when I was in the hospital, I had ringworm at 12 years old, and they brought me a radio so I could listen to the radio. And I would listen to Big John and Sparky, which was a Saturday morning show. I was in the hospital for about a month. I was an experimental child with what eventually became, it was an X-ray treatment. I was in a theater, in a motion picture theater as a kid, and I leaned against the seat like that, and I caught ringworm. So I went to Children's Hospital, and they didn't have, at that point in time, we weren't doing anything dramatic with X-ray. It was new, and they experimented with me. So I was a kid in the hospital at 12 years old, and I had nothing but the radio, and my parents come to visit. And that's how I began radio. I began radio by listening to it, which is what everybody did, I think, in those days.
Now, can you tell us, forgive me, I don't know, was Bob and Sparky a local New York show?
No, it was a network show. Big John and Sparky. It was a Saturday show.
So
and then
tell
there
us
was also another one, Andy's Gang.
Okay. So tell us what kind of...
Hi, kids, Froggy. Remember Froggy the Magic Twanger?
Oh, yes.
These were Saturday morning shows. They were popular. See, we used to listen to shows on Saturday. One day a week you listen to radio. You didn't listen every minute of the day like these morons now. You know, I mean, everybody here has a radio up their nose, and they don't use it anyway.
This is about 10 years of age when you had the ringworm?
12.
So that's...
Didn't I say that already?
That's 1950, 51. So...
Right.
In New York...
On the radio was Ozzie and Harriet, incidentally.
Yeah. In New York, certainly television was happening...
I was in Buffalo.
Okay, you were in Buffalo.
Born in Buffalo.
So...
why can't I be from normal parents?
You can be. So what are your first memories of television then?
My first what?
Memories of television.
I was on it. That's my memories of it. I was in high school. So anyway, the thing that happened with Jerry Lewis is he came to Buffalo. He said, we'd go to a film in a theater, and then you'd have a little stage show. That was the presentation of Paramount Pictures. And all the motion picture companies did that. They'd send their stars out to meet the public, you know. And I scrounged 30 cents to take the bus uptown as a kid. My mother would never allow it, but I was so fascinated by show business. I don't know why, it was in my blood right from the beginning. And Jerry Lewis walked me through the back of the stage. I stayed afterwards, and he let me come back there. Dean Martin was very rude to me, as a matter of fact. So was Marilyn Maxwell, who was in the film and also with him. I never forgot it. But he was great. He was great with me. Showed me around, kissed me on the cheek, told me I was cute, nice kid. You know, he gave me a little, I would say, a spiritual goose. And then years later, the same thing happened with Milton Berle. Came to Buffalo, you know. Buffalo never went to people. People came to Buffalo. You know the joke, right? If you can make it here, you can make it anywhere. It used to be if you make it in Buffalo, you can make it anywhere. But Milton Berle did the same thing. He had a big arena appearance. And then subsequently, when I was older, Elvis. I mean, I kept getting people when they're coming to town. So I figured, if I'm going to be somebody other than the guy who goes to see all these guys, I better leave town.
So
I was on TV in high school. There was a dance party show, and I was one of those precocious people who had a personality, and the host of the show gave me a segment to do comedy. And I was in high school. And the guy who did the dancing with me, who was also on the committee, was Michael Bennett. His name is Mickey DeFilia. He's the guy who wrote Chorus Line and Dream Girls, and, Michael Bennett.
You say in your book, if I understand correctly, that maybe even before that TV job, you had a job working as a DJ at high school dances. Did I get that right?
Yeah, I was at the Boys Club, and that was actually the beginning of the thing that led to TV. I wasn't looking at television to be on television. Mm-hmm. I liked going to the Boys Club on Friday night dances and playing the music. then you could get laid. It wasn't going to happen on TV.
So can you give us...
Do you know what I did on TV? I danced with a black girl and got in trouble.
You say that in your
Because-
book, yeah.
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 I mean, my father said, oh boy, he hid from me for a whole day because he was embarrassed.
Let's mention, and I meant to put it on camera, and we will when we wrap, but let's mention part of what we're using for the information for our interview is your memoir, which is called Let a Smile Be Your Umbrella, But Don't Get a Mouthful of Rain, the Joey Reynolds story from Red Brick Press, written, I think, around 2000, something like that.
Yeah, something around that.
And so some of the information comes from
Judith
that.
Reagan and I are friends. I saw her the other night. We went to see The Post, as a matter of fact, at the Pacific Theater in L.A., to be specific. Theater.
Yes.
She was wanted me to do a Telltale book, because that's what she's famous for, with Private Parts and Bernie Carrick's book, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And she had her own imprint.
Yes.
And when she faked or rather suggested that O.J. Simpson's book about if he really did it, what it would be like, it got a lot of flack. So she made a deal with Murdoch, and took a $10 or $20 million golden parachute and left as head of HarperCollins. But she wanted to publish me doing all the stories, some of them which I'm telling you now. But I don't want to do that. My book is not about that.
No.
Nor is my life. I don't live my life like TMZ. I don't know how these guys, what do they do when they get up in the morning? Where do they wake up, if at all? There are a bunch of people who are like, they're like, you know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of the crows in Dumbo, in the movie Dumbo, where they're on the fence and they're making fun of the elephant with big ears. Meanwhile, the elephant's the only one enjoying life. Those characters are standing there on the crow waiting for something to happen that's bad and evil. It's like bullshit. So I hated that. I always hated that. I don't like gossip. It takes the paint off of furniture. It's amazing.
Well, tell me about this first gig you had as a DJ. When you had that first job, you were about what age? In high school?
16,
Okay.
something like that.
Now, when you got that job at that time, did you see yourself as going in that direction? Did that job
No.
seem like a...
No.
Okay.
So,
So,
a day at a time. You don't sit.
okay.
What, I have a big projection of what I was going to be when I'm 40?
You never know. So,
We're lucky to eat. I was a poor kid. We were poor. When you grow up in a poor neighborhood, you don't think about that. You think about how you're going to get out of the house.
So you got the first gig on television, which is your first, I guess, basically your first, would we call that your first professional job?
No, my first professional job was on the radio at WWOL. But I'll tell you how that happened. I mean, you saw it in the book. Bill Mazer, who's a famous sportscaster, had a television show. He was a sportscaster every night on our local TV. That's how he started before he came to New York, or went to New York. Bill had a contest, the Announcer of the Future contest, and I entered it. And I was more of a guy who wanted to market than I wanted to be famous. So we Xeroxed, it was at that time a Gestetner machine, the votes. And I had 5,000 votes more than anybody else, and I won the contest, but they were all the same signature. And when the agency came to me and they said, we can't give you the money because you cheated. You Xeroxed or you copied all these votes. And I said, yeah. And they said, but you know what? We're not going to make you the Announcer of the Future, but you'd be a good salesman. You're so full of crap. And I went over to WWOL, this popular daytime radio station. And they had foreign language and rock and roll. It was a mix in those days. We didn't have that solid top 40 yet. So I went over there, and what we would call an intern. And I became a salesman, and I sold time for them. That's how I began. I think when you get started in our business of wanting to be famous, it's a bad direction.
Well,
And I think anybody watching this or listening to this, wherever it's going to go, and you want to have a career, Shakespeare said it better than anybody. He said a lot of things very well. If there was a Shakespeare.
that's right.
He said, to thine own self be true. And the play is the thing. It's always about the play.
Well, if we could, framing it in the terms of being true to oneself, so leaving fame out of it, but self-identity. You say that in getting involved in broadcasting, you were not particularly, in those first jobs, you were not particularly envisioning being a broadcaster or being whatever. Was there, can you trace a time along the path when you first thought, I am a broadcaster, I want to be a broadcaster?
No.
Never.
No.
Interesting.
You live life a day at a time. You look at it and say, okay, what do they got today?
Even though you've done it your whole career, you never felt like
I
this
still
is...
do that.
Okay.
I'm still doing it.
Interesting.
I don't care where it goes.
Yeah.
I'm not responsible for the end result. I'm only responsible for my behavior, for where I move my feet.
Any thoughts on like this early stuff, Randy? That he's thrown out here? No?
Well, see, what I'm talking about here is a philosophy.
Yeah, the
But
career
maybe you want to get away
specifics.
from it and get into specifics.
Career specifics are important to PPB, but your philosophy is something that has guided me personally for decades.
It's you got to have a philosophy. I mean, everybody has to know what they believe in. What do you believe in? You know, and I don't believe in following everybody. I never believed in that. That's what we're getting at here.
And that has been your strength on the radio, because you've never just been time and temperature and all that kind of stuff. You've always had something to say, whether it was between the records or over the records or with no records whatsoever.
And that's why I get fired all the time. I get fired because I'm hard. They say I'm unmanageable because I don't do what they want.
Like in this interview, you won't give us specifics of your career.
Well, yeah, because
You want to talk about philosophy, which is as viable, as important, and maybe more so. But there are two things going on here at once. So your philosophy has guided me for decades. At the same time, Matthew has a desire to want to poke and prod your memories of your career specifics.
Oh, well, that's good. Well, what do you want to know about my career?
Well, let's chat about you. You had the first radio gig, and you said I was really a salesman. You said that's really the job that they gave you.
Well, nobody wanted me on the air. I wasn't a strong voice, and I wasn't in anybody to.
Well, that's what I was.
I was a kid hanging around.
Yeah. Now you say that in the book that your style in the beginning that you have stayed with is in that era of disc jockeys with sort of a very big presentation, very energetic presentation. You chose to be very natural and conversational.
Yeah.
Now, did you intentionally do that, or did it just seem intuitive to be that way? What do you think about
Intuitive.
that? Yeah.
You just it's first of all, you have to like people if you want to talk to people on the air, or else you follow a format which is prescribed. And I didn't like a prescribed presentation. Mine was making it up as you go. It's ad lib. It's improv. Same as Second City Television was for people on Saturday Night Live in the early days when it was good. You know, I mean, it's following things that you have inside of you that you think that you want to get across to someone else, and you try to reach as many people as you possibly can, because if you don't, you get shot down. So you know, it's cause and effect. If you start doing things that are not working, you're going to get shut down, and you won't make any money either. You got to make some money. So there's a prescription that you have to follow some guidelines. I'm not totally unbridled.
Yeah.
I was on WR for 15 years, the most conservative station God ever created.
Yeah.
You know, and I never lost a license or got in trouble, and nobody ever do you know that no one ever sent me a memo in 15 years? Never. From management? Never. I got no reprimands, no discipline. They let it go completely. That's very different, you know. But they wouldn't do that with everybody. You wouldn't do it now. You know, they'd want you to sit there and answer the phone. You know, I came into the studio one day with Bob Grant, who was cantankerous, but Bob's funny. First of all, he's brilliant, and then he's funny. But on the air, he argues, you know, get off my phone. You don't know what you're talking about. And, you know, that's Bob's routine. It was like Joe Pine East. And that's where he got it from, actually, too. So he's on the air, and I go in there and in the afternoon sometimes, and I talk to him. And Buckley said, I don't want you in the studio there because you'll laugh. I don't want Bob to be funny. I don't want Bob to have fun. You want Bob to be mad and mean and take the phone calls. They don't want that. They have an idea what they want. So, you know, are we going to do what I want, or am I going to do what you want? Or can we compromise? That's what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm. They want you in the box that they understand.
Well, how about the box that I understand?
Yeah, exactly. You talking about some of these early jobs, how you got them through surreptitious or clever means. One of your first gigs, it may be WKWK, I'm not sure which, you got by sending
Someone else's tape.
a tape of someone else.
That was in Ashland, Ohio.
Okay.
Well,
Tell-
the thing that the guy I worked for in Buffalo, the foreign language station, didn't want to pay me. And I was living at home, and my father said, "Are you going to start getting paid?" And I said, "Yeah." They gave me, like, what do they give you? $7 an hour. I may as well go to Burger King, which we didn't have then. So I started to read Broadcast Magazine, which is where you look for the jobs, and in the back it was a little ad for a station that says outside of Cleveland. Well, they didn't tell you that it was 100 miles outside of Cleveland. And I sent Jerry Stevens' tape, who was a guy I eventually became friendly with. And he was a good jock. I liked the way he sounded. So I sent his tape. And they hired me. But they didn't ever hear the tape. They just wanted a warm body. So the joke was on me. I got a job with someone else's tape that nobody really heard.
Well, let's talk about some of these people that you work with at some of these early jobs that are perhaps help form your philosophy.
Yeah, not everybody's bad.
No, of course
don't
not.
misinterpret this.
In some of your early gigs, you talk about working with Howard Cosell.
Yeah.
You talk about Larry King.
Yeah, you want to go deaf? Have one in each ear.
Some of the early. So let's talk about. I'm just going to throw out some names, and they may or may not be in order. But this is early on. You worked with Cosell, and you talk about Cosell being in Florida.
Howard Cosell was a show-off.
Sure.
And so was Muhammad Ali. I mean, they're both showmen. But Howard Cosell was once again, we're talking about smart people now. We're not talking about someone who fell into it. He came to Miami for the Johansson-Patterson fight, and at that time he was just training Chris Schenkel, who became a very big announcer under Howard's cape. So Howard did a lot of good things. Howard created situations where and let people in. He was not a selfish guy. He was just a braggart and a showman, and he was also very adamant about what he believed in. And even so much so that Frank Sinatra had him MC his concert when he came back. And it should have been renamed because of the fights. Old Black and Blue Eyes is back,
The main event in '74.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was Howard Cosell as the host. He's a show business guy. So you meet Cosell at WAME, is that right? Whammy in Miami.
Okay. How'd you get to Miami?
Oh, I faked my way.
Okay.
I worked for Lou Dickey. They own Cumulus. You know who they are?
Yeah, I know them. Know what Cumulus is, yeah.
Oh, do you know who he is? He's the guy who founded it.
Okay, no, I
and
don't
he had
know
those
that. Forgive
wonderful twins that run the company into the ground.
Mm-hmm.
Why should I say that? So they're going to watch this and they're going to say, "Oh, he'll never work for us again." Yeah, bullshit. So the thing that happened with me was I was in Ashland, Ohio, where I got a job with someone else's tape, and that was okay. I did a polka show, a trading show, a beautiful music show, and then at night did the rock and roll show. I mean, we called it, at that time, it was block programming. And they would sell time that way. Every hour was a different format. So I learned radio that way, actually. The guy who owned the station was an engineer who lucked out by buying it at the right time, and he's a nice guy, Charlie Calhoun. And I worked for him, and he liked me enough, and I enjoyed it. I lived in a commune. We had a lot of people who, at that time, it's a college town. Ashland, Ohio is a college town. And I was young. When you're young, you bunk with everybody, and then you just go, it doesn't matter. There were two girls who I used to go out drinking with because I just started drinking beer. And they were, if you're not 18, you can only drink 3-2 beer. So all that makes you do is pee. Because it takes a long time to get off on. And the girls were very nice. They were just quirky. And I sent my tape off to, this time was my tape. I sent it to Wheeling, West Virginia, where they had one of those ads again. And they liked me. And they asked me to come and join the crowd because I had gotten better on the air. So Lou Dickey had a fascination for Pittsburgh because it was the next biggest city. that overshadows Wheeling, West Virginia. Wheeling is not exactly a cultural center. It was more of a hick town with an island with hookers. You know, I mean the Wheeling Islands where you would go to pay for sex and a racetrack. They go well together. So I had a job offer from WKWK, top 40 station, low wattage. And you got the biggest country station in the world there, WWVA. It covers the whole country. But this thing, you couldn't get it at home, you know. I mean, it's a small signal. But he hired a guy from Pittsburgh to program it. And the guy from Pittsburgh liked me and hired me. Put me on the air in the afternoon. And I did very well. I used to drive up to Pittsburgh because Rod Roddy, who became the announcer on The Price is Right, Rod was on KQV in Pittsburgh. And I would drive to the drive-in theater and listen to him on the air because he was funny. I enjoyed him. And I would even go to a drive-in movie and take the speaker and not even use it because I'm listening to the radio. But it was enough a parking place and halfway to Pittsburgh, so I didn't have to go all the way into town where I could pick up the station. You know, I mean, now I became interested in the craft. That was the beginning of being interested in the craft. Now I want to see where this is going. Up until then, I didn't care.
Interesting.
And I went to Pittsburgh with Lou Dickey, and he was a very smart, dressed Madison Avenue salesman who moved to Atlanta, which is sophisticated. It's the New York of the South. And he married a model, Patty, and they had these kids eventually, but not then. He bought the station from a Judge Reynolds estate for $65,000. Very low. And that was his money. You know, he put that out and he bought the station with mortgage. And we were on there and we did very well. And we even beat WWVA, you know, it was top 40 radio. We played rock and roll records. It was good. And I got quite good at it. And I listened to people around me now, and I started to pick up what was going on. And I made a tape. Again, the dreaded tape. Now, here's the irony here. I sent it. I saw another ad. You know, the only place we'd see ads was in Broadcast Magazine.
Sure.
Essentially it. And I had a couple jobs from there, as you know now. So I looked at it. It was something that paid some money for a startup in Miami. And I sent my tape. And they liked me. They hired me. They wanted me to come down there. I thought it was a nice compliment, and I had not a lot of money, but I had my father signed for me to get a car when I was in Ashland. So I had a new Buick. And I quit the job with Lou Dickey, who was furious because I had all the ratings, but he wouldn't pay me a lot. And he had me arrested for cohabiting with these two girls I brought in from Ohio. And I wasn't sleeping with them. They were too crazy to sleep with. And we had a whole day of interrogation. They brought us before this, politics. Lou was friends with the DA. The DA brings us in and interrogates us and knows that we're not sleeping together. He took us in separate rooms and asked us questions. I didn't care about these two. I went out drinking with them. So it got to be a contest of how do I leave here gracefully. And I thought he was a real prick to do that. See, nobody in radio broadcasting, as you well know, or television, ever says they're wrong or they're sorry. They always blame the talent. They never make mistakes. Even Fred Silverman, when he lost the network, didn't make a mistake. Nobody makes mistakes. Nobody. The guy at NBC who drove him into the toilet now is running CNN. They never make mistakes.
Well,
So that's a resentment. You know, I carry that.
Sure.
And so how can I trust the industry of fools? How can you trust clowns in the circus? All they do is pile in one car. You know, I mean, it's unbelievable how I was formed at the beginning. See, now I get down to Florida. Wait till you hear this one. The guy who owned the station in Buffalo that I worked for in sales was a Polak named Leon Wyszynski. He changed his name to Leon Wilson so he could be Jewish.
Okay.
'Cause, you know, if you're Jewish, you can be in showbiz.
Okay.
And his son is Teddy Wilson. So Teddy's a younger guy who bought a brand new car, and he had girls and all this stuff. You know, wait till you hear this one. Now I'm Joey Pinto. I become Joey Reynolds, right?
That happens in Miami?
Yeah. So I sent no, and I sent my tape. I walk into Miami, and I'm looking at Teddy Wyszynski, and he's looking at Joey Pinto, and we didn't know each other. I said, "What are you doing here?" He said, "What are you doing here?" We both had each other in homeroom. All of a sudden, I get hired with my new name, and he's running a station with his new name. I said, "Oh, wait a minute, this is uncanny." He had a boat across from the Surfside 6 boat he bought. Remember the TV show? Mm-hmm. And he parked in front of the Eden Rock, and he and Larry King lived on that boat. Larry was our morning guy after a while. Not at the beginning when I got there, but after a while. Then Larry Kane, who chased the Beatles, you remember him? He and I were newsmen at the station. I worked with him.
Now, you've talked about working block formats and community formats and doing all sorts of different things, as many broadcasters did in those days. And now you say, I was a newsman. Was this the first time you had done news, or had you done news at other stations?
Well, they changed the format of the station, and they wanted me to stay.
Mm-hmm.
People were always changing formats. A daytime station, too, you know, sunrise, sunset. It's hard to get ratings. Plus, the bulk of it was there were other stations in town doing really well. I mean, Miami had the #1 top 40 station for years with WQAM, and then along came WFUN, Fun Radio, and some of the people from Whammy went there. It's all shifting around, you know.
So let's cover a couple things in Miami. First, this is Miami circa what year?
Gee, I don't know, 60.
Okay, so this is before the big building boom of the 80s. This is Miami, very different from today.
60.
What was Miami like in those days?
Payola. There was a convention while I was there where all the disc jockeys gathered, and they got busted. The feds moved in and busted them for payola. Record companies paying off program directors and catching them. Mm-hmm. And they had a congressional investigation, including Dick Clark, because he had publishing on music he didn't write, writing credits on songs he didn't write. He didn't write any songs. Mm-hmm. And he was playing the records that he was pushing and owning, favoring. So he went before Congress, and they made a swap to get him off the hook, because in those days we weren't trying people like we are now. But he was guilty. It's in the congressional record. I mean, it's not something I made up.
Well, other names from that period, you've already mentioned Larry King. You say he was the morning man when you went there.
Well, before that, he was at WKAT. He was very talented. You know, he's funny. No, Gary. I mean, he was not a serious talk show host to me. Yeah. He was a comic. Yeah. He did voices. He used the echo chamber. I mean, you know, we all were feeling our way.
Yeah. So
even Marv Albert was a disc jockey in Syracuse when I got there later. And a terrible one. I fired what's his name? Rush Limbaugh, who was Paul Christie or something. I forgot his name.
You fired him in Florida or somewhere else? In Pittsburgh, okay.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't need him. Mm-hmm. He was not a good jock. I didn't need him.
Anything you want to say about Miami or some of these things?
Well, Larry King and his check writing days. Do you have any insight to his...
Friends with Murph the Surf. I mean, come on.
Were you around when all that happened?
Of course.
Okay, well, tell us what you recall.
So was
about
Fred
that.
Hall. Fred Hall became a big star on television later. That he used to beat his wife. I stepped between them and got a black eye. Mm-hmm. Don't step between a married couple when they fight. No. I learned that one at 20 years old.
Well, I'm just throwing out a name here. Was Alan Burke down there at the time you were there?
Yeah, I mean, I met him, but he wasn't on the air with us.
Okay, yeah.
He was a pain in the ass.
Well, I didn't know him, but he seemed, based on his acerbic on-air persona,
Well,
I
there
could
were a
see
lot
that.
of them like that. You know,
Yeah.
you meet them in person and you don't want to be bothered with them because they're all about themselves. So my profile is one of wanting to do things that are for the greater good.
But that's such contrast to most people's thumbnail sketch of you. Oh, Joey Reynolds, unmanageable. He locked himself in and played the same record over and over again. He called the mayor a dumb broad.
She was a dumb broad. Ann Usello, and she only had one term, and she should have gone the first month.
First female mayor of Hartford.
First female mayor
in the whole country. So you were on the air and you called her a dumb broad, and then what happened?
I would never have done that with Shirley Temple, and she was a movie star and became a congresswoman. You don't do it with smart people.
Right.
You do that with people who are not equipped for the job, and then you make a comment and everybody gets mad.
Well, of course, if you call the mayor, I mean, this is this is
What,
commerce.
you're going to kiss a title, or are you going to? It's principles over personalities. Mark this down. Principles over personalities. That's America. That's why you have the Declaration of Independence. It's principles over personalities. John Adams, forget him. Principles. Forget any one of those presidents, including Lincoln. It's the principles.
I would like to have Hamilton's money right now, but the question.
What, from the theater or the president?
Well, you figure which one is more profitable. So, what did you expect? The golden rule. You're talking about principle and personality and all that. The golden rule: who has the gold makes the rules. So you're on the radio station that's dependent upon the city for its livelihood, selling airtime, and you were surprised that you were suspended for a month?
Well, yeah, because I was making money for them, and their greed was bigger than their conscience. Do you understand that? I mean, can you see the separation of you're working for somebody, you're a principled person, and they're not.
Right.
And yet they want to be principled about your being unprincipled when they're the ones who are unprincipled to begin with. I mean, it's always hypocrisy. The hypocrisy is what traps us.
You're way too hip for the room, and the room being the planet.
Am I?
Yeah, because you see these people for what they are, and they just think I'm trying to do business here, and he's getting in my way. How dare he do that? How dare he do this? How dare he have done that in the past? And he's never going to do that with me. I mean, we've heard that your whole career. So finish the story. You're suspended for a month. It's a great story. We might as well tell it.
I come back on again because I had to go to Manchester to work part-time during my suspension. They fired me, and I went to Manchester, Connecticut, which is on the east side. With the guy there was wise enough to put me on the air while I was on timeout, and I was over there, and I came back to do the show again on WDRC. My time was up. It was a union thing, I'm an AFTRA member. It's union. This was now SAG. So now after 1 month, they did the term, and I came back on, and I turned the mic on, and everybody was waiting to hear what I was going to say, and I said, "She's still a dumb broad," and that was the arrogance that I had. But I also moved into a station that was brand new. The property was brand new, and they were very protective of it, and they didn't want anybody to, they walk around adjusting the lampshades just like Matt here adjusts the microphone. I mean, it's perfectionism. So when the manager came in, he didn't allow us to drink coffee in the control room. He got very fussy about everything. So when he came in one day, I threw coffee on the lamp in the waiting room. And I said, "Oh, you mean this?" It's all about arrogance when you're angry at people who are hypocrites. And that's a lot of the acting out that people do in real life. And I'm regretful. When I got fired in Buffalo, it's because they wouldn't give me money. Now, back in that time, in the 60s, I was the number one disc jockey in the country. I mean, I had a 60 share all the time, every time out. And they should have paid me. And I had a TV show that was number one rated too, once a week. But they didn't give me a lot of money. So my father said, "Well, you better get it now. You're not going to ever be able to get it, you have to do it when you're hot. So I went to them for a raise, and that was the beginning of what happened when Frank Gorshin came in and Forrest Tucker for a telethon, and they were favoring them by bringing them cases of booze and flying them in and out for rehearsals. And it was my anger because I couldn't get the money I needed to have for my life. So I got on the air when they came to be interviewed for me during the telethon, and I said, "Why don't you tell everybody about how you get paid to do these things?" Because nobody wanted to ever admit they were paid to do telethons. And I was fighting that, and I opened up on the air about it. I said, "You got to." And he said, "Well, I didn't. I'm not paid for this." I said, "We just had a case of booze delivered to your dressing room. You didn't pay for that, and they're giving you $10,000." Well, he walked off the show. So the president of the company came over and fired me. He said, "You're fired." And I said, "Well, you didn't hire me." He said, "Well, your boss is fired." I said, "You're going to fire everybody you see in the hall tonight?" And he said, "You're fired. You're done." And I said, "Oh yeah, okay." So I went into my dressing room and I pulled my shoes out and I went over to his door and I nailed them there and I said, "Fill these, you asshole." And there was a note in the shoes. And then I came back with a girl. I was drunk. I came back with a girl, a go-go dancer, in the middle of the telethon, signing autographs. It was a circus. But see, to me, they couldn't be bigger than me. But I was bigger than them emotionally. I was already bigger than them principally.
And this was WKBW.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Big. So now let me tell you what happened with that. Years later, I go to the reunions. I had chutzpah. And I'm at the reunion and I run into Bob King. Now, he was very nice, and he's smart guy. And I said, "Listen, Bob, I'm sorry that I did that because that was rather arrogant, and it's part of my lashing out, my arrogance." And he said, "Joey, we didn't know what to do with you." He said, "We didn't have any way." I said, "Just give me money. That's what you needed to do with me." And he said, "Well, we didn't have that yet. And then you went to work in Detroit, and you're slamming us on our station that we own there on WJR. And I wanted to hire you back, but I couldn't. My hands were tied then. Because, you already dumped on us every place you worked." So I screwed myself with that one. You got to behave.
But you have to be true to yourself.
But you got to be true to yourself.
How do you do that? Combinations.
Which one is the greater of the evils?
Depends which decade of your life you're in.
Right. It depends on what event you have.
Now, from Buffalo, when you're fighting that job, this is about 1966, more or less?
Yeah.
And you went from there to WIXY? Is that
I
right?
went to Wixie in Cleveland, yeah.
Cleveland. So how'd you make that jump? Did you just send out tapes? Did you have reputation at that point? What did you do?
I was number one jock in the country. Everybody wanted me. Even Gordon McClendon wanted to hire me in Buffalo. On his other station, he came out in his pajamas at the Hilton Hotel. He had me in his room. He's drinking vodka. And he's saying to me, "Well, we can do this." I said, "You got 250 watts. You're not going to do anything. You got a 50,000 watt station you're fighting." I said, "You know better than that. You got Cliff in Dallas. How are you talking about this toilet?"
Now, by
That's exactly what I said. And Harvey Weinstein was there. He was doing record hops. Harvey and Corky, the two brothers, they were promoters in Buffalo.
By 1966, the whole Boss Jock, Bill Drake
That wasn't here yet.
thing has happened out west.
Not yet.
What happens in 64?
It wasn't a phenom.
Yeah. Well, that's what I'm going to ask you about. When that starts spreading across the country, you've already explained that your style was a more natural style.
Yeah,
it
so I
wasn't
quit
such
radio.
quick patter. So, did that affect the juxtaposition of the change?
Why don't you ask me why I quit radio?
Why'd you quit radio?
Because the Beatles got bigger than the jock.
Yeah.
Nothing to do with Boss Radio.
You say that in your book, too, yeah.
Nothing to do with Boss Radio. Boss Radio to me was just an acronym. And you know who came up with the name Boss Radio?
I don't know if I do.
Clancy Amelson,
That's
who was
right.
the head of the Midnight Mission. I just saw him the other day.
That's right.
He was just there. He's 95. He was the marketing guy.
He was the marketing guy for KHJ.
And he also was a marketing genius because he came up when he worked for Frito-Lay with the "Bet You Can't Eat Just One." That's his slogan. He was very bright. And look what he's doing. He's working with the down and outs and the alcoholics and all the people who are who can't help themselves. That's what he's doing. That's a brilliant man doing this,
Yeah.
not collecting paintings like J. Paul Getty.
So you took the gig at Wixie. What was that? It was a short job. What was that job like?
No, it was good. I worked for Jerry Spin. He had 99 records he played because he was getting a lot of payoffs. And I said, why are we playing 99 records? It's too many, you know. You couldn't figure out what we like. It was they offered me to stay there. I got offered to go to Detroit, and they wanted to give me the TV show on Channel 5, the upbeat show. And I didn't want to stay, but it was good. I had a good experience there. It was okay.
Now, that same year, I think, 66, you go to Detroit, WXYZ, famous call letters. The Lone Ranger came from
ABC.
there. Yes.
Here I am working for those guys again.
You call it in your book, you're very ambiguous about it. You say in your book, WXYZ was, quote, my wildest ride. What did you mean by that?
Well, what I meant by that was the way I lived. Ford had created 25 metal flake cars for use in the airports for display, and they were actual vehicles that were operative, and they gave me one of them. That was my wild ride. And I had a metal flake Mustang convertible. Do you think anybody noticed me in Detroit? It matched everybody's teeth. You know, it was unbelievable. And I lived at the Detroit Athletic Club, and I violated all their rules. They wouldn't allow any women in the rooms. You're not allowed to bring any women in the rooms. They're only there for the luncheons and weekend, sometimes events in the evening with celebrities. But I brought them up to the room and had sex and was asked to leave there. But the reason I was asked to leave was how I got caught was interesting. I was always drinking in those days, and I got home to the DAC, and they all liked me over there, and the people at the desk didn't. They knew what I was doing, but they didn't say anything, turned their head. And I brought this girl home with me one night, 2 a.m, because you know in Detroit they have blind pigs where you drink after hours. Don't forget I was on at night, on the radio at night. So I was out drinking, and I took a girl home with me, and I went to the front desk, and I gave the guy a bottle of champagne, and I went upstairs. Nobody said anything, but I overslept in the morning, and there's nowhere for her to leave without being noticed. So I had to be very clever. And I thought of it, and I went down the hall to the end of the hall, and I took one of the maid's uniforms out of the closet, and I gave them to this girl to wear, and she was able to leave the building. The next day, Fred Wolf, who was a member, charter member, he had asked for me to go and see the director of the club, and the director of the club says, it was very formal, you know, this is all the car companies, you know, and he says, Mr. Reynolds, I would like you to know we do not have any white maids. I was busted.
Anything about that station or that period?
No, the station was owned by ABC.
Because you were only there
My
for...
manager was Tony Mammarella, who was a producer of American Bandstand.
Yes.
And Oliver Trez was the president of ABC, and they were friends. That's how I got the job. Plus, Lee Allen wanted me. He heard me in Cleveland and really wanted me.
But you only stayed in Detroit a fairly brief time, is that right?
Yeah,
Okay.
and they never forgot me.
You go from Detroit to Hartford.
No.
No? Where do you go next?
Well, you
Philly.
were in Hartford twice. POP and DRC, were they
Oh,
together?
POP was a lot earlier.
Okay. Well then.
POP was way before KB. That's when I broke the Sherry record. And then I went to Flint before I went to Buffalo. I had a lot of jobs.
Well, where does WDRC come into it?
Later, much later.
Okay. Late 60s?
Yeah, I didn't care about that much so much.
Okay.
They offered me a lot of money. I didn't like it.
You didn't like Hartford?
I didn't like the station.
Okay.
I liked the owner. And then they bought WIBG in Philly. I went back to Philly.
Well,
But I liked living in Hartford. I liked the city. I had a great house, had a maid. It was nice.
How'd you feel about Dick Robinson?
Well, he was a good friend. You know, he was a jock. The thing about KB, I was with Sandy Beach last month or so in Buffalo. Danny Neverth is one of the big jocks. Sandy was. We all were personalities on WKBW, including Rod Roddy and everybody. It's a personality station. And Sandy, when Danny's wife died recently, we were all on the air together. He and Danny and I, about maybe 6 or 8 weeks ago, I guess. And Sandy said something very interesting. He says, you know, nobody ever argued on KB. We never really were jealous of each other. And it's very unusual. I said, yeah, you know, you're right. Everybody liked everybody. All the guys on the air were still friends. We all liked each other. We didn't have this cattiness about us. Everybody knew who they were and what they were supposed to do, and they liked who they were and where they were on, what time they were on the air, and what they were doing. And everybody really got along. And I said, yeah, you're right, Sandy. You know, nobody ever fought. We never had that stuff. Philly was the opposite. I went there on a visit after Detroit. Tony Umbrella is from Philly, and so is American Bandstand. So Tony says, we should go see Joe Niagara. He's on in the morning. Let's go see Joe. So we see Joe, and Joe says, oh, it would be great to have you here. You're a hot jock, and we loved you. You were so famous. I understand you killed him in Detroit. Yeah, I killed myself. And he says, but you know, while you're here, you got to avoid High Lit. Because he's just dangerous. A couple days later, I'm out with Bill Wright, the midday guy. And Bill says, yeah, you know, Joey, you know, we have a good reputation. You'd be great on the team here. You like everybody. But be careful of Joe Niagara. You can't trust anything he says. So now I'm out with Pilot. And High says, you know, Joe and Ed are friends, and they're not. I'm thinking, this is like a kindergarten. You know, they're all making a lot of money with record hops. One guy's got a helicopter to take him to the 5 hops he's got in one night. And I'm sitting there saying, I don't think so. But when I was in Hartford, I got along with Dick Robinson and Sandy. But the others were kind of like snobbish. That wasn't my favorite place.
Is that when you met Kenny Griffin?
No, I knew Kenny before then. He used to hang around POP when I was, when I was there. He tried to get in there.
Now, we've mentioned WIBG, or maybe not by call letters. We mentioned Philadelphia. That's WIBG.
Yeah.
This is where you create the mingles. Is that correct?
Created what? Sorry?
The mingles? That's in Philly, right?
No.
No, where's that?
It was actually done in a studio in New York, but I tried to get us to carry it in Philly. I did it with Rod McBrien, who died a few years ago.
What I mean is it was during your tenure at Philly that you made those. Is that right?
I brought them to ABC first, to
Okay.
Rick Sklar, and he turned them down.
Yeah. Okay.
And then I brought them to our station, and they turned them down. But I had done some bad jingles for Hartford that didn't work once, so they had a bad taste of my work. But not that kind, not that style.
Okay, now that's interesting. You say because you are known for your production and imaging work, you say I'd done some bad jingles for them that didn't work. So what was your how did you first get involved in that creative space of thinking about doing imaging and making jingles?
Well, I worked with Tommy Shannon, and I owned a recording studio in Buffalo, and he was on opposite me on the air. He was on WGR radio, and I'm on WKBW. We're opposite each other on the air. And we were friends and owned a recording studio together. That's how much companionship and fellowship there was in those days in that arena. Mm-hmm. That's what I'm saying. That's a good case in point. We recorded, I had a hit record. She's Not There became a hit record. I produced records before I got into the jingles. Made a few records. I wasn't Phil Spector, you know, I mean.
Is that when you and Frank Slay got to know each other? Bob Crew?
No, I met Bob Crew in Miami when I was at Whammy. He came to Miami with his Whiff and Poof song, which was a hit.
Right.
And he liked me, and he talked to me a lot, and he would send me all of his music, and I would give it to the program director, Sid Knight, who would put it on the air. And he liked me as a music contact because he produced records. And I didn't ever take payoff, so they all liked me for that. Plus, I was here for the payola thing, or in Miami. I wasn't going to do that.
What was that? Booze and Broads and the headline in the Miami Herald
Yeah.
about that
well,
convention.
Well, it's true.
Was it a true
Well,
story
what
about?
convention doesn't have that?
Well, of course, but wasn't perhaps the mayor's wife was misinterpreted as being a hooker, and
I
somebody?
don't know.
Oh,
See,
yeah.
now you're into the gossip.
Well, can't help myself.
You must be on TMZ.
So let's talk about mingles. You've talked about it in your book. Or after having done jingles in the past that were not successful, how does this
Only
idea?
one time, and it's because
Okay.
I hired somebody who failed us in the studio
Okay.
with, I paid him a lot of money and he didn't come through.
Okay.
But I relied on him. Music director. It
So
was a concept, and it didn't work.
Yes.
Everything you do doesn't work.
no, we try not to. We prefer not to focus on those things.
Well, let's pretend it didn't happen.
Okay. I didn't even know about it. You brought it up.
Well, of course I did, because
Okay.
it did happen.
That's good. Can you describe what the concept was that didn't work?
Yeah, we were trying to image the station, give it an image, and so as TM Productions did later on, with their production of Where Your Friends Are, WGRC, Where Your Friends Are, and I thought, oh God, that's so lame. So I wanted to do something that was hipper, and I went to Gamble and Huff in Philly, and I hired their arranger and gave him $5,000 to write me a series of things that were really cool. And they just never got off the ground. It wasn't terrific.
So
Terrific.
the mingles, which are
And they never forgot it either.
tied to the popular records of the day,
Those were terrific.
how did this idea come into your mind?
I figured we're wasting a lot of time over the intros of records, saying here is and that was. So why don't we have the music that is in the record on the intro and use them so that we could image the station and separate it from all the other stations. In other words, when you hear this song with the call letters as part of a record on your station and you don't hear it on the other, when you're hearing it on the other, you're imagining what you should hear with someone else's call letters. It was an illusion.
Now, here's
And Bill Drake said to me famously, he says, well, I use them for dessert. And I said, I think you really need to have them as the main meal. But, he had Johnny Man Singers for the regular jingles that he did. 93 KHJ.
All a cappella, very effective.
And a beautiful job. But that wasn't what I was doing. I was trying to mingle. I call them mingles eventually. They were call up your ratings in the beginning.
And how did Pam's steal that or adapt that
Because,
idea? They called it pop
started
tops.
Listen, people are jealous, and how do they steal from me now? What are they doing now? The same thing I just did in Times Square 5 years ago.
And how did you react when they started pushing this
Well, you
package?
just let it go. You can't do
Let it
anything
go.
unless you have a copyright on it or a trademark. And I brought them to court and won with TM, because TM had done it. Yeah, they did exactly. They call them pop tops.
That was Pam's
pop tops. Well, I got them to stop. Whoever that was, legally, they stopped. But the thing ended too.
Now that's interesting that you were able to, because the concept is nebulous enough that if someone says, I'm going to make some jingles that sound like pop songs, unless they owned the pop songs, which they didn't and you don't, it's interesting that you were able to thwart them legally from doing that.
Because they were taking my idea, which I had on 40 radio stations, and emulating it and claiming it was original.
Mm-hmm.
They had to not claim it's original.
Okay, yeah.
You got to be careful. You can't be saying, hey, I thought of this when someone else is doing it.
Now, can you speak to
I had an argument with Harry Nilsson about it.
which is in your book? Tell us about that.
Well, we were on the billboard at the Hyatt across on Sunset, and there was a party. We all were drinking. Everybody used to get drunk. We'd go to Martoni's, and it was up on the roof, and there was this billboard on RCA for one of his records, albums. And I looked over there, and someone introduced us, and he said, "You're the one doing those fucking jingles." And I said, "Yeah." I said, "We've got one with you on it." "Well, I don't want my arts interrupted. It's my artistic privilege to produce a record." I said, "Well, you got a guy talking over it. What's the difference? Wouldn't you rather have some music on it? But you're interfering with the production of it when you are producing. You're overproducing. You're overproducing me, and you're correcting me." And I said, "Oh, that's nonsense. We were drinking and talking." I said, "That's not true." I said, it gets more airplay. Your record will be played more because it's part of the fabric of the station. You'll get more performances from it. You're a writer, and you're going to get publishing and performances." He didn't see it that way. He said, "Well, I'm going to tell you the next record I'm going to have no intro on it." And I said, "Yeah, well, then I'll have something a cappella at the beginning of it." So, arrogance again. But it's always that. You're going to find someone that doesn't like it. Then he's a hit artist. He didn't like it.
For the historical understanding, were these things? Did you ship the record with like a version with this intro produced in, or was it just like a thing that the jock would?
We shipped tapes of them.
The jock would just roll it in live when they played the records.
No. It was
The copy of the record that the radio station played came from Joey pre-packaged, so it would
So
be
it
like
was?
sitting on the dock of the bay listening to KHJ and then dock of the bay.
Otis Redding.
Otis Redding sings. So he sings the intro, and then Otis comes in at the
Well,
post.
that's what I was trying to frame that question. So the answer is it was a self-contained thing.
Right.
Sure, self-contained. It was all pre-produced and set in the studio.
And
so we were at the mercy of the program director for some of the copy that they wanted, and we lived up to that. I had a production guy doing that.
how'd you find all those singers who emulated the style of the artists?
Well, we didn't always emulate the style of the artist. Sometimes it was the feel of the record. It wasn't always trying to imitate. It wasn't trying to imitate the artist. It was getting into the groove of the record. And that, like we did with Sly and the Family Stone. We didn't have Sly, but we had that feel, and it's a rhythm. And I had Chester Pickering, who's a wonderful hit producer. Matter of fact, he did a lot of hits on his own, and in L.A. And we were here at I hadn't thought about it in a long time. Wally Harder Studios, and I had terrific imitator singers, but mostly we had people who were background singers on hit records, and they got their chops, and they also read charts. And I had Jack Keller, who had his own hit records, all the Monkees records. He produced them. Now, it's not like he didn't know what he was doing. And Jack and I, as a matter of fact, we stayed in business, and I did the first television jingles in history.
For Metro Media, was that the Mingles went right into the Metro Media? That was the same.
But it wasn't the same concept.
No, but it was one beget the other.
Yeah, it was Jack and I. And Jack, we did Metro Media Television, 11, 11, 11, those things. And that was simple, just to reinforce the dial position. And we were having to pay the same rate as a 1-minute spot for less than 10 seconds. So we went to court and renegotiated that, and we got the judgment with AFTRA to be able to have a 10-second rate, a less than 10-second rate. So it was a mini rate instead of a full performance rate, and I was the first guy to do that. I mean, I've done a lot of things in my life, that are good and bad.
Was that good or bad?
Well, it's good. It helps everybody in the industry because, it creates work. Like this, once again, it creates employment, and also it's fun.
Well, bad in the sense that those performers got a lower per performance rate as a result.
They got a rate. You
But they
wouldn't have
worked,
anything
is
at
your
all.
point. They worked, exactly. Yes, they
Talking
did. They
about
did something. Yeah,
5,000 people out of work.
yeah. You tell in your book a story about Bill Drake.
Yeah.
And you trying to get the Mingles on the Drake stations, and you having some trouble coming
Well,
up
I came
against
to
him.
I came to New York, to L.A. and I had a love affair with someone I was chasing after, and that didn't work. So I took my little mingle package, and I was trying to find a place where I could go to put them on the air. And the guy I worked for, Rick Buckley, didn't turn him down, and I screwed him by leaving him standing high and dry at WIBG, and he owned KGIL. You're not KGIL's not going to buy him. And I went over to KMPC. You know, they had their noses up their ass. I eventually went to work for them. You know, nobody wants to touch leprosy. So I went over to Topanga Canyon, and the asshole wouldn't see me. And I knew he was at Martoni's drinking all the time, so I got a fix on what he looked like. And I didn't go over to the table. I didn't want to do that. That was rude, and everybody's drunk anyway. So I went to Topanga Canyon, hung around the office, and I tried to get in to see Gene Chenault. It's Drake Chenault. You know, he's the businessman. They were hoping I would go away. I sat there, and Bill went to John. He went out down the hall to the toilet, and I followed him in there with the tape machine, and I stuck my dick out, and I began the tape. And he said he liked it. I thought he meant. So I was happy. You know, he said, "Well, come on with me," and he laughed. He had a good sense of humor, and we went and meet with Gene Chenault, and we made a deal. And Gene says, "Don't sell them to anyone else. I'll take them. We'll take them." He said, "Can you do them for all 40 stations we have?" Because they had all the RKO stations, plus the other ones that were consulting. And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Are you equipped to do that for all of us?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "How much do you want?" And I said, "Maybe $5,000 a month from each one would be okay. And then we won't even charge you by market size." He said, "Fair enough." So I got my first $1 million.
Now you say don't sell them to anyone else. Is that market exclusivity or
Yeah,
complete
market.
complete
No,
exclusivity
just
for the whole
market.
country?
Just
Okay.
for that market.
So you could sell
Then
them.
I went to San Diego. I didn't. I had the Drake station, and wherever I had a Drake station, I couldn't sell them to
Okay.
anyone else.
Okay.
Boston, San Diego, Los Angeles, Memphis, Detroit. No, they didn't have one in Detroit. Detroit, I sold to someone else. CKLW. So it was good. Big year for me.
And this is 68? 60, what year is this?
I think it's later than that.
71. 71. Sorry, okay, yeah. Anything more about the Mingles or imaging?
No, but that was a ride. That was really a ride. Because, you know, I got to see everybody then. We were just starting. Rock and roll had just moved to L.A. because it wasn't here. I had an office in the 9,000 building. Billboard moved to L.A. Doug Weston had the Troubadour.
Yes.
The Roxy had just opened.
Lou Adler.
Lou Adler was here, but, you know, down the street, we had a guy who had a house, and he was trying to get in the record business, named Richard Branson. I lived in Laurel Canyon, above the country store.
Oh,
halfway
yes.
hill. I was a hippie,
Hmm.
smoking weed, drinking.
Did you see all those song icons in Laurel Canyon?
Well,
you know,
I
you
was
had,
friends with all of them. You know,
they were all in there.
John
Carole
Phillips
King
and Michelle, and
yeah.
I'd go over to the house with the Three Dog Nights from Buffalo, Corey Wells. You know, all these people we're friends. Everybody. You know, I'm Sid and Marty Croft. It was a culture. You know, and the only one I didn't really get along with. I mean, we had no Billy Joels yet. You know, where they were so big. There was a start of it with Neil Diamond and Barbra Streisand. The Columbia people came. They were the arena acts, the big ones.
So this is where it is around this time that you formed Joey Reynolds Associates. Is that correct?
Well, I had that in Philly.
Okay. But it really comes into its own in a big
LA.
way out here, I guess. Yeah.
JRA called it.
Okay. And from this, you make a transition into other types of production.
Yeah, I stayed off the air. I didn't want to be on the air.
Now, if we could discuss something philosophically here regarding you say, I stayed off the air. You said a moment ago, I didn't like the boss radio thing. It was changing radio. It was taking the personality out of it. The jock was no longer preeminent. The song was preeminent. Yet,
Well, Bill Drake thought that they were. He thought that shorter personality, but personality. He didn't think it wasn't personality. He thought Robert W. Morgan was more efficient. They were looking for efficiency. See, I'm not a short form guy. I don't believe in short form.
well, what could we say about the fact that as much as you disliked the shift in the business, you in essence were a part of furthering it by creating jingles that would take the jock more off the air and
No. I just catered the funeral.
Okay. So if it's
That's
going
how I
that
looked
way,
I just did it for for what I was doing to cater the funeral. I knew it was dying.
so might as well make a buck on it, right?
Well, I might as well make my mark.
Yeah.
I came here to have a love affair. I didn't come here to make jingles.
Interesting. KQV. You mentioned KQV earlier in the conversation about driving your car to listen to Ride on.
It had nothing to do with my job there.
I know you just went there to listen, right?
Yeah. I liked Roddy.
And then
I
later,
got him a job at KB.
And later you worked there, though, right?
I was a programmer.
Okay, but that's much later, right?
Much later with a new owner.
Okay.
Taft Broadcasting,
So,
not ABC.
at what point do you sort of think about getting back involved in radio after having said for a while I just was off the air?
Radio's dead.
Well, but you've been on the radio quite a bit lately. So, when did you start thinking?
I'm not on the radio. I don't look at that as being radio. I think of this as being a triple cast right now. I'm on radio and television, which is a combination of radio and television. Sure. It's not a radio show. A radio show is a radio show. You sit there and you answer phones and you argue with people about Trump.
Well, that's one kind of radio show, yeah.
That's what they do.
Yeah.
Or else they're parasitical. They're parasites. They live off of everybody else's work. They don't make anything in radio anymore. Nobody produces anything for radio except with exception. They don't do shows. They actually do live off of someone else's music that they don't make. They live off of phone conversations that they don't author. They live off of news that they did not report. And it's just a carrier of disease. They don't create. Don't you like creative?
I would argue that in the public radio space there is some creativity happening. Yeah.
Public radio is being squeezed.
Yeah. Since you're saying these are all what you say, do you want to just run some names and things, or what do you want to do?
Well, sure.
Do you want to talk about any of these at all? Because you know more than I know about this.
We can maybe get a quick comment. You did have a pretty good run at KMPC Radio, and you also did a weekly Joey Reynolds Comedy Hour that I was happy to participate in for Golden West syndication. Do you have any recollection of that?
Well, see, once again, you're not talking about a radio show. You're talking about having a comedy special that we did with Tom Chauvin, and Randy was involved in it too, and myself. We would go out with a tape recorder, and we would do what television couldn't do because the cameras were big and the lighting was necessary and the sound was off. So we had radio. That's the advantage of radio is mobility.
In fact, you actually were mobile. We did the running gag.
We went everywhere.
We were at the running gag.
My biggest complaint about talk radio is none of these assholes ever leave the room. They sit there and they prophesy. They have all these ideas and thoughts about everything, but they've never been anywhere.
So all the people who thought you were unmanageable suddenly came around so many years later. Bob Hamilton, who's the ultimate format guy at K-Earth in Los Angeles, he ends up bringing you in for at least some ratings boosts.
Well, he exploited me.
Yeah.
So they don't want to have me around. You understand that?
They'll bring you in for a quickie.
They want you to do what they want from you, but they don't want to have you around. They like to do what they're doing. Most of these people probably are not able to do what I can do. They're not authors of anything imaginative. They found something that works and they drive it home to make money. Well, there's nothing wrong with that, but that's the essence of it.
We had a radio station in Milford, Connecticut that nobody listened to, even at gunpoint. We put you on the air, and suddenly the phones lit up not only with an audience, but with the program director from the competing station, Chuck Martin.
Well, because people want entertainment.
Yeah, well, you always drew people.
Do you think answering a phone is entertaining on the air? Is that entertainment?
So this
sit there with Ken and John and argue about some bullshit thing after the fire? I mean, to me, there's not that they're not talented or anything. Well, what are we doing?
See, this wit and showmanship that you're showing us now, this brought you into Z100 in New York, brought you back to
Brought me on
Detroit,
the road.
put you on some major markets on the road, as you say. Yeah.
I
People
went on
wanted
the road
it.
live because we didn't. After the satellite show, I did the first satellite show in the country.
Satellite live, delivered
And I
via.
realized that you can reach different cities, but you have to go to them. Unfortunately, now you don't have to. Back then, you did.
You talked about simulcast. You did KOA in Denver, radio and TV.
Yeah.
And you did from New York the NASDAQ building. That
That's
was
right.
that was a triple
That's
cast, yeah.
exactly what I've been wanting to do, and I still want to get that going now.
and that was NBC, WNBC's.
It's NBC's digital channels.
Right.
NBC television, right on Times Square and NASDAQ window. You could
Just-
get any bigger.
It was amazing. You continued to break new ground.
2 hours every night, 10 to midnight live. The show cost $5,000 a week. Jimmy Fallon was 12 writers, 1 hour. He cost $500,000 a day for the writers.
You talk about creativity. Let's
something
let's go to the times you were a creative director of 20th Century Fox Records. How did that come to be? I think I know the answer, but share it with us. And what was the job entailed? And why did everybody park in that parking lot and go into your back door office there? They came and went and came and went and came and went. My God, Sandy Barron even showed up the one day that I was there.
Well,
What were they all coming
everybody
into?
wants-
Wanted your cocaine, or you wanted to sit
No,
at your feet?
I don't think I was selling cocaine.
No, but you were. I think you were generous with it at the
I was
time.
not with cocaine.
Okay.
I don't think anybody who does cocaine is generous with it.
Well
I
said.
think you really have that wrong.
Why was Sandy Barron there? It's 5 years after his last
Because
album.
he had an album and he wanted to do another one.
Oh, he wanted
And
a
he's
second
comic,
album.
And
Okay.
he wants to work. And
Thank
most
you.
people want to work.
Well, you cleared up that.
And why was I was next door to Barry White? Do you think that Barry White was an angel of mercy?
Well, when you went to his home up in the canyons, what did you say at the gate?
Oh, I've had a big encounter with him.
You have many. So talk about the record industry and Fox and all that.
Well, 20th Century Fox was an anomaly because they were not wanting to make films anymore. Let's start with that. They were badly burned by Hello Dolly, and it was Goodbye Studio when they sold Century City, which was the back lot.
Columbia.
So that they then
Cleopatra.
took their money and they went into television with it somewhat by buying stations. And they bought Marine Land and Aspen Ski Resorts, and the CEO of the company was a financial genius, and Dennis Stanfill. And he hired Alan Ladd to run the film division, and he brought Russ Regan in to run the record division, and Herb Einstein to run, which has nothing to do with smart, but he was smart, with to run the publishing company. So the trick on all of these things is to have publishing, see, because they're residual. It's like CinemaScope. There's a rate that you get. We own Deluxe, and you have to be using these labs. They have to pay for themselves. They have to generate some sort of traffic to get income, and the best traffic that anybody can get is that with residual effect, so that it keeps paying you. Like Star Wars, they've made that a religion now, as George Lucas says. They turned his religion into a comic book. This is a very difficult ball to juggle when you have a CEO who is a money guy, and you have a creative force that can't get out of its own way. So we're not making good movies. But to support it, the television was making money with MASH and Love Boat, and Aaron Spelling was on the scene. The TV division was healthy, but it has to carry something else, which is unhealthy, unfortunately. And the real estate, buying real estate, was actually a good idea, and I think they did very well to do that. Eventually, it sold the company to Marvin Davis, who's an oil tycoon, because of that. And then, of course, Murdoch came in with his plan from Marvin Davis. But, 20th Century Fox, I got in there because Harvey Cooper saw I was bright. I worked on the outside. And then they asked me to come inside. And they asked me to do all the marketing, which was a little bit, I was young. All these other people are old and they've been around since dirt and they're established. They're waiting for Tyrone Power to make a comeback. I'm in there, and so I had the vibrancy in that downstairs office of mine. We had all the one sheets on the wall to show what we were liking and what we thought was famous and fabulous, and when the producer came in and didn't see it was his, or he saw 15 others, or a director, if George Lucas came in and saw that you were working on 12 other films, it's not going to make him happy. So I took all of the one sheets off the wall and I painted the walls white, so no one would know what I favored or what we were doing. And I had a petrified fish that Evan Maurer brought me from Scandinavia, and I put a note in its mouth that said everything needs a hook. And I hung it from the ceiling over my desk. And that's all that I had. That was the only prop I had. I had a coffee bar and a bathroom. And the bathroom, actually, we didn't do any cocaine in there. I did a lot of smoking weed, but not in that office. In the bathroom, which led out to the parking lot where Ellen Ladd got smacked one day, or someone got high going to work. But it was you know, I mean, it's a cultural change.
You worked on the Star Wars project?
Yeah, well, certainly.
Yeah, well.
And, you know, it was the opening. Star Wars was, I developed some things that were shot down. I learned how to fabricate and do printing, and that's part of the mechanical work in production. You know, we've evolved in what used to be rotogravure and printing and used to be laser has now become a desktop. And it's easy to make even motion pictures with scenery behind you. I watched last night To Catch a Thief with Cary Grant, and that particular film has a lot of ride through Cannes, France, with sports cars. And as they're driving, with Grace Kelly's hair is waving in the wind, she never left the studio. You know, I mean, it's rolling of the film behind her.
Rear projection.
And that was all done with Alfred Hitchcock's genius, you know, and he had people looking this way and that way, and they were, you know, it was more mechanical. But now you don't have to do that because everything is done with this great animation. It's interesting how film has gotten better and television got worse, except for events. They do events very well. TV.
So you learned the record business from the inside, and you married your creative talents, and then somehow you got the opportunity to become a president of a record company.
Well, I wasn't president of a record company.
Well, yes, you were. What would you call your relationship?
That was really like that's a bullshit thing.
Well,
Jay Stream saw that I was extremely bright.
Jay Stream was Wayne Newton's manager.
He was more than that. He was a billionaire and a builder from Chicago who had great success, and he was the president of the Arabian Horse Association worldwide. And he saved Wayne from his brother because it was the Newton brothers, and the brother was getting all the glory, and Wayne was not getting any money. So he organized it, to make a long story short, got Wayne on the right track, got him separately, positioned him with Howard Hughes, positioned him with all the Suma Corporation hotels, made him a big attraction by financing him properly and positioning him. And Jay saw that I was a really good part of what was going to happen. And he wanted a new surrounding. And he said, I like you, I like what you're doing, and I like what you're doing here. Because I was always doing more than I was supposed to be doing, remember? I was, you know, you have a certain job, but then if you're doing more, people either like you or they want you to go away. There's no middle ground. Jay liked me enough to trust me with his company. And he wanted me to work for him and not pander to Wayne. Because he said, if you hang around the dressing room, you'll be about as useful as a dick on a mare. It isn't going to work because you can't do that. It doesn't, Wayne will take you into his world. It'll be Wayne's world. So you got to stay right where you are and then be creative. So I was a little more creative than Wayne wanted me to be, but I got a lot of things done too. Don't forget, we made deals with Ted Turner. I mean, if you really think about it, Ted Turner didn't have the CNN yet. He had
Superstation.
the superstations on UHF. I mean, it was a different time in history. If sometimes we tell these stories, we tell these things, you got to put it in frame. You know, there's something else going on. I liked Wayne Newton very much, and I was friendly with him, but I didn't think that he was a contemporary artist. I thought he was a great entertainer, not a contemporary artist. So we bought that. We put out the first star-shaped disc. Remember?
Yep.
And we fought Disney for it because they wanted it for When You Wish Upon a Star. I mean, we were pretty adventuresome with things. And then he wanted to do a disco record, which is not exactly the image of Wayne Newton. It's
You Stepped Into My Life.
You Stepped Into My Life so we did all that stuff with the footsteps and the disco jocks and putting them all together in a party room, trying to seduce them into playing Wayne Newton records on a disco station.
Well, now let's explore something philosophical again. On one hand, you're saying, I didn't think Wayne Newton was a contemporary artist.
No.
He wasn't a guy who should be doing certain forms that you helped him do. This is just a question.
I didn't help him do the disco. I was there, but I didn't. I wouldn't have voted on that.
You helped promote it, I'm sure, right?
No, we issued it. I don't like when people are out of form. But that's just me. I mean, I thought he's a classic artist. He's a standard artist.
So
why would he? Are you going to have Barbra Streisand do hip hop?
Yeah. So how do you, as a creative person, work out the juxtaposition in your mind of this guy shouldn't be doing this, but I'll try to help him succeed in doing it?
Well, what you do is you dress it up. And I hired Randy and Tom to come here to do the marketing from the East Coast for freshness. And we had a bunch of people that were stealing from the company, and we were trying to put a stop to that and put everything in the direction of having a company that was going to be serving this artist, who's the number one artist in the country, in nightclubs, or in Vegas, which is nightclubs, and putting him on the map where he didn't belong. He would belong, in today's date, he would belong on a country station, which is a pop station anymore, because country became pop. But we didn't have that advantage yet. And I don't think I would have just put him on I would not have relegated him. I thought he needed to record some things that were more Wayne Newton-ish.
And you got him from You Stepped Into My Life, which he had done at Muscle Shoals on his own, as I recall.
Yeah, and with Terry Woodford, he should have done the other thing, Change of Heart, which he did the Change of Heart album.
Then he came out with the perfect song for him, Years.
Yes,
And how did that get bastardized?
Well, that was a screw job. I bought She Believes in Me, and I found it from Tanya Tucker wrote it, and I got it from Cal Rudman in Philadelphia that this song was going to be done by Kenny Rogers, but I'll give you a tip off to it, and he did, and we paid him dearly for it. Mm-hmm. We sent cash for him for that information, and I got Wayne to record She Believes in Me before Kenny Rogers. But the machinery was already set up, and they sabotaged me because I didn't know it wasn't before Kenny Rogers. He already done it, but they didn't release it yet. So we were the second ones in. We got screwed.
Wasn't there also a cover battle with Years? Years of hanging on, years.
Well, I don't know that didn't have anything to do with this.
Okay.
But She Believes in Me was a hit song. Great song. And Wayne's version was great. That's where he belongs. He don't belong doing You Stepped Into My Life like an Indian doing disco. It really, although with due respect, there's artistry, but that song I thought it was a really good song for him. I'm not saying he's better than the competition is really between Wayne and Kenny Rogers. Mm-hmm. And Kenny Rogers started to move in Vegas. He started to get very popular. Did The Gambler, remember? So this is all marketing. It's putting your guy out front and running with it, like Disney is doing with Star Wars. You know, you find it on your toast. I mean, how many times are you going to see the name Star Wars somewhere?
Well, is there a time, though, you talk about Wayne Newton as a classic artist, he shouldn't be doing disco. Is there a time when one acquiesces to the idea that there simply is no market for a Wayne Newton in any form or a performer of that style in any form? Commercially, it's just not viable. Or is
Well,
that incorrect?
A sold-out artist and 2 shows every night in Vegas for 36 weeks a year and beating Frank Sinatra that is not in that competition.
Mm-hmm.
That's not an honest evaluation.
Okay.
He has had quite a following. We needed to cater the following.
Mm-hmm.
You needed to go to the standard bin rather than the absurd, in my opinion. But once in a while, the goofy thing works too, you know.
Mm-hmm.
You do something off the track and that works. It makes a difference.
Is it possible to get those nightclub legacy fans to buy new records consistently?
Of course. Everybody would download records.
Okay.
They download them, remember?
Well,
Now.
not then.
Well, now it's the same thing.
Yeah.
You pay 99 cents a play right
Sure.
now.
But those people never went to record stores, and that was going to be the part of the
Well,
piece
you would
that
say that they don't go to record stores, but they certainly would appreciate having a gift of it. And if you make something an event, people will come to it. You know, the Field of Dreams. You have to make it an event. You have to make everything an event. You tie it into something so that it works. What's the Super Bowl doing with entertainment at halftime? What do we have Justin Timberlake for? Why? What's that got to do with football?
Yeah, exactly.
All these teams are fighting each other's asses all year long, and they're going to watch Justin Timberlake for 15 minutes. Why? What does that have to do with it? It's an event.
It's called audience maintenance. What are you going to do for those 15 minutes?
Right. Exactly. It's an event. You create events.
Anything else on Wayne?
Oh, tons, but we won't.
Well, do you want to just go down a list of names?
Yeah.
Talk names? Okay, let's just throw out some names of people with whom you've worked or friends of yours and get your thoughts on them. You mentioned the name Rod Roddy several times, yet we have not talked about how you met him or what he was in your life.
I drove to Pittsburgh to listen to him in the drive-in. I did mention that.
Well, no, you didn't mention how you met him. You just mentioned that you liked to listen
Lou
to
Dickey,
him.
who was enamored with Pittsburgh because we had a consultant from there to do our station in Wheeling, would go to Pittsburgh on occasion, and we'd go to parties, and Rod Roddy was there. That's how I first met him. And then he called me later on, years later in Miami. He wanted tickets to the Johansson-Patterson fight. And I said, don't you remember meeting me? He didn't remember me at all. And then another time went on, and I told him how much I liked his work. Another time went on, and he was out of work and couldn't get work because he had some sexual problems that were on the front page of the Cleveland paper, and he got arrested, and it gave him a bad profile. So I convinced the program director of WKBW to hire him because he was a good jock and funny. And he did. And he was great. That's how I met him.
So prior to the WKBW gig, you actually had not met him? It was only on the phone up to that point?
Yeah, I met him in Miami. I just said that to you.
When he called you on the phone about the tickets?
Well, then he came to Miami, he took me out to dinner, and I gave him the tickets.
Yeah.
Well, I met him.
So,
He was rather snobbish.
okay. Do you want to say
That's
any more?
okay. I mean, I didn't have a relationship with him, is what I mean. I didn't.
Yeah.
We just met, and I told him how much I admired his work.
Okay.
Nothing wrong with that.
Now, you mentioned a problem he had that was on the front page of the paper. Therefore, it's not a secret. It was publicly revealed. Do you want to say anything about what that was?
No.
Okay.
Because that's his business.
Okay.
Then we're into gossip again. That's
Well,
why I don't want to do a telltale book.
Okay.
See, all these thoughts I've just given you were mine all this
Sure.
time.
So, at what point did your relationship with him, you say he was, in the beginning, he was distant, snobbish, you called it. At what point over the years did you and he become good friends as opposed to being distant? When did that happen? Or how? At what point,
I think
more or less?
I got him the job.
That did it, okay.
I
Yeah.
think that's how you become a good friend to
Yeah,
begin
okay.
with.
Okay.
And then years later, when I got straightened out with all the things I went through, I was in a power position, and I hired him to do the announcing for Star Wars. He was the guy that did the commercials.
Oh, okay. That's
How about
interesting.
that?
So, like the TV, like the TV trailers, he
He was
did
on all of
those.
them.
Okay,
He was on all the story of Star Wars. He was on the commercials. He was on all.
interesting.
He was the radio voice of it.
And you and he were friends. Pretty
Radio
much.
voice, not the trailers in the theater.
Oh, the radio commercials. Okay,
Yeah.
okay. And you and he were friends up until he died,
Yeah.
right? Okay.
Oh yeah, very much. And he even always wanted to live here, and eventually did. He programmed Coast, KOST. Yeah, well, this has been quite a series. He's a good friend. He's a good friend.
Just throwing out some names again. You worked with him in New York, Soupy Sales.
Yeah. Soupy got a star on the sidewalk here. We all came out for that.
Did you have much of a relationship or any thoughts about Soupy
All
Sales?
the time. I had one. I worked with him at NBC. He was on middays. I was on after him at WNBC Radio. We fought over guests. Carol Burnett stepped on me to get to him. He was great. Soupy was one of a kind. You know, he invented that kind of television. The TV.
When you say that kind of television, what would you define as his kind of television? You mean
It was double entendre.
Okay, yes. What about Dick Clark? You mentioned him earlier, your relationship with him?
Well.
Okay.
My manager was his manager.
Yeah.
My manager was his producer. I liked it.
Is there anything?
He was always standoffish with me, but he knew me and I knew him real well.
Okay.
I liked him.
You're chuckling.
I had
Anything on
moments
that?
with him. We went to.
Well, you knew him well means you knew him too well.
Yeah, I mean, you know.
Yeah, you could
that kind of-
have compromised his
Guys
image.
from that era had a different kind of way they carried themselves. They didn't put all their laundry on the table. And at that time, Dick was doing had a game show in New York and another one in L.A. And he had a watch that had L.A. time and New York time. So I said, "Oh, you got two faces." So he had Randy stop the tape. He said, "We're not going to go in that direction, are we?" You know, I mean, you know, people protect their turf, and I was being a flip guy. But I mean, all through the years, though, I've been good friends with him. I like him very much. This is not Ryan Seacrest, you know.
Sure.
This is a guy with talent.
An interesting combination of great skill on the air and also great business acumen. Both those things together in an interesting way.
Well, he was primarily about money. And he was a local announcer in a booth, and Tony Mammarella took him in when Bob Horn had just raped a girl in the park on the way home from his TV show and made the front page of the paper owned by Walter Annenberg, who also owned the TV station and TV Guide.
And TV Guide, yes.
So he got rid of his own guy. You talk about sexual acting out, huh? We had that a long time ago, didn't we?
Mm-hmm.
This is way before Harvey Weinstein, all the Hollywood trash.
Sure. As
So
old as
Dick Clark was the announcer in the booth. Tony Mammarella grabbed him and said, "Hey, you're on." And that's it. And he was good. He's perfect. You know, he's a gentleman. He's real nice. He's really calm. He's good looking. He's dressed well. He carried himself well. Everybody liked him. You know, that's what the job was. He wasn't supposed to be a personality on television. But in a way he was. You know, you get used to him, and he had a style. I hate to match him up, but I mean, I'm almost dangerously saying this. I think Rick Dees is talented, and Ryan Seacrest isn't.
Okay.
I mean, Ryan Seacrest is just pretty, and you know what I mean? He's cute. I don't hear anything from him that I need to hear.
Mm-hmm.
I guess that's what I mean.
Okay.
Rick Dees would be coming from a left field sometimes, or some comedy thing, or something that was interesting. I found him more interesting.
I couldn't compare Dees and those two, but Dick Clark and Ryan Seacrest, Clark had, in a way, he has much more skill than Ryan Seacrest, although Ryan Seacrest is obviously very skillful. But in a way, Clark was a little vanilla. He was very in the middle of his.
But he was good vanilla.
Yeah, he was extremely good
vanilla. This other
vanilla.
guy is like bad vanilla.
Okay. Anything else on Dick Clark?
Not that they're not successful. We're just talking about it's like what I like. You're asking me about me.
Extremely successful, yeah. But we understand what you mean. Running in names again, a name you mentioned in this conversation, you mentioned him. You dedicate your book to Tom Chauvin.
Yeah, Tom was a good friend. He came here and hated L.A. all the way. He never wanted to be here. It doesn't look like Poughkeepsie. And he wanted to go home. From the day he got here, he wanted to go home. Never liked like this, but he did well here. I mean, he got an association with different people that brought him to a place where he became very successful on the East Coast, in New York. But he had personal problems. He couldn't ride in a car to be closed in. He couldn't ride in an elevator because he had claustrophobia from being locked in a railroad station office over a weekend in an elevator. So it took him years to get over that, unfortunately. And then he couldn't take a job in a high rise forever. And he was very smart. He was really smart. He figured out a lot of things. But he was unlike me. He wouldn't say it. He would never let you know all these things that I'm letting you know now, because they're his thoughts, and he would keep them privately. But he was able to get out there too and go to all the conventions and sit in the front row and stay the latest at the office, and everybody always thought he was right there. And he was smart. He figured out how to market things and how to promote. He was very discreet about it. An interesting guy.
Now, you have described him, you meaning Randy, as being a sort of a person who is socially very adept and conversation and life of the party sort of thing.
At these conventions, they would gather around him, not for the shade, just because he was glib and would laugh at your jokes and made you feel like you're the only person that's in the room, even though there's 25 people at his feet.
Great salesman.
And so totally likable. He, as much of a private person and conflicted as he was with his own baggage, he seemed to be totally open and beloved universally.
I mean, you could talk to him about anything, too.
Well, you called him the 50-pound ear because his judgment, his ear was just so incredible.
Well, I always liked him. You get along with somebody and you like who they are and you know who they are. He let me into his world. I let him into mine. He knew me real well. And so does Randy. He knows me real well. But that you don't let everybody in. And just because I say all these things doesn't mean you know me. Those are just my thoughts.
You mentioned in your book Don Imus. You also mentioned Howard Stern, both from WNBC.
Yeah.
Any thoughts? And you say, by the way, in your book, you say, I do not like the Don Imus television simulcast. I don't like the idea of putting a radio show on camera with no visual appeal. I guess I hope that's a good way to put it.
Because I think it's just a camera on a guy doing a radio show.
Well, that part aside, any thoughts on Don Imus or Howard Stern that you want to mention, having known those men?
Well, yeah. I mean, there's a whole... I could do a book on this one. What are you talking about? They didn't like each other because they were both fighting for the same space. King of the mountain. It's ego. I think Howard's going to be on with David Letterman this week when he's got his new Netflix show.
The new show, yeah.
Yeah, it'll be an interview show or something. He's popular. He's a personality. I don't have any regrets about working at NBC. I have regrets about things that ended too soon. I think they sold the station. GE sold the company. And they kept Imus. He had a 5-year no-cut contract. And I was saddened by our helicopter going down with Jane Dornacker, which is in the middle of my show. And I stayed around a lot longer because of that, emotionally. I was very attached to the station. I love Dale Parsons. He was program director. And he just happens to be one of those people that you could really trust. When people understand what you're doing and they let you do and they help you accomplish your goal, that's really a good person to work with or work for. And you get a little older too in age and have a little bit of experience. You don't want to be putting up with people who are trying to act like they can do what you can do. See, that's a good programmer, when they don't try to be you. I had one who did in Denver. The guy thought he was better than I was, and he would sit in on weekends, and I'd go like this, make a face. You already know who you are. You know who you are. Imus is a phenomenal talent, but he's lazy right now, and I think he's phoning it in.
Well, then let me ask you to close. Tell us about your most recent venture in the media space, which has been the late Joey Reynolds show, which is a triple cast, as you've talked about. How did this begin, and what has been
Well, what I'm doing is several things I'm doing right now. One is I spoke the other day to an acting class of George Gallagher's here in L.A., and I gave them the same little thing I'm going to tell you now. I think we are filling a void in the film industry now that has been left open by radio and television's lack of responsibility. I think there's now that doesn't mean everything's bad on TV. It's not the vast wasteland. I think television is excellent with sports. It's in the moment. It's real. I think the events are covered beautifully. It's very, very well run industry in those areas. I think the award shows are an asswipe. They're just a waste of time. Nobody needs to get an award for something that they. I mean, you don't need the red carpet. Is like a joke. It always was with Joan Rivers, and it really is a joke. What does it matter? You dressed up and you went out and got a statue and you go home, but you really got your agent to give you some more work. It's an industry of the Confederacy of dunces. That's what it is, exactly. Oscars, Emmys, gimme Grammys, Tonys. BLT, what is that? A bacon lettuce tomato sandwich award, whatever's going around, whoever's doing it, it's all just horse shit. But what it does is it draws a sponsor, and that's what I'm saying. The point is to get, if you can't get subscription, get a sponsor. You got to have one or the other, or you're not going to be on. And that's the reason they have all these specials. They have one every month. And CBS is in the special business. I don't think they even know how to do television anymore. All the shows on TV are about amateurs. Am I starting to sound like Ken Draper?
Kent Burkhardt.
Oh, yeah, is that what it is? Am I getting there now? Am I over the top? I think I lost it a long time ago today.
Well,
all you're missing is an invoice pad.
Is that what it is? Yeah.
Well, we were just asking you to tell us about the genesis of your late Joey Reynolds show.
Well, so that thing is a triple cast. It needs to have a sponsor. It needs to be on radio, television, and the internet. And it needs to be accessible to all audiences. And then one medium tells the other one. One of the reasons why we don't have that success is radio doesn't talk to television. And it exploits TV. When they're out of news on television, they talk about film. It's the way it is. I mean, you're just asking me what I'm doing. I'm trying to recreate a feeling of putting people together and also having entertainment. That's what I'm doing. And I'm working on it all the time. I was asked yesterday to be a part of a movie which Johnny Madeiras producing. It's a film called At the Hop. And it's that celebration of that era. He gave me the script yesterday. And I called Michael Imperioli from The Sopranos and asked him if he would be interested in being in it. And he could be the father. At the Hop is a reality journey, whereas Grease is not. Those are made-up stories. The closest one to a reality would probably be Hairspray because of Buddy Dean and the color issue, but that still is a made-up story. This is the real deal, and no one's done it. So Johnny asked me yesterday, would you be involved in this with me? And I said, yeah. So he asked me what I'm doing. I'm doing these things.
Well, I was specifically asking about the radio show, but is there anything you want to say about the end of the current moment of?
There's no radio anymore. I mean, you keep going with that like there's
yeah,
a
that's
radio.
right. I do.
Why? Because it doesn't mean there's not a listening post.
Yeah.
Or that you don't have a studio with sound and someone sitting there and talking. That's not.
Radio is a word I'm using to describe that the spoken word is the preeminent focus, and I would contend that what you're doing, the spoken word is the preeminent focus of it.
Yeah.
So that's what I mean by that. Yeah.
Well, and that's what I was doing on the television version of what I am doing on the radio. It was a camera but you have to have something visual.
Yeah, that's
what I was saying about
yeah.
Imus. You made mention of Imus earlier. I think just a camera on him while he's getting mad or being grumpy. I mean, that to me is not a show. Now, if you're listening in the car and he's having a debate with someone, it's interesting. But not to have a camera on him, and then you're going to stop what you're doing and have a cup of Joe, and you're watching him get mad at, in the early days, Charles McCord, who was actually was very talented.
Well,
He was the Gene Shepard of that crew.
I've
Charles
never
McCord.
been quite sure what their relationship was, because were they really close, or was it just a relationship of convenience that they tolerated one another?
No, no, they don't tolerate one another. Charles is great, smart.
Because he times Imus seemed to genuinely get under his skin.
Well,
Genuinely.
that happens to everybody. You know, get married, you'll see.
Well, let me ask you this.
That's a marriage.
To wrap up, 1939, you were born. You've seen a time when there was no television. You saw television come in. Of course, you were just
we had a round screen. It was black and white and the only one in the neighborhood.
But the point is, when television happened, a lot of people sold off radio stations. They wanted to get out of the business. They were afraid of radio. We're in a moment now for the last 10 or so years, this thing that has happened that has revolutionized everything again. So you've seen that happen. Is it a more interesting... Do you like working in this moment where we don't know what's happening and how to define it?
Of course you do. It's a void. It's a painting. It's a canvas. You have to put your painting on there.
Or is
what
it...
kind of an artist would you be if you walk in and do someone else's painting?
Well, sometimes it's nice to know what...
Nice to know what? What someone else has done that's successful, yes.
That's right.
It hangs next to you.
Yeah, and to know how to monetize
But it's not
it.
what you're working on.
Yeah.
So why would you focus on something you're not working on?
So you weren't happier in the 60s when you knew what the profit model was, you knew how to put everything in order, and...
I was restless and doing drugs.
Okay.
How would I be happy with that? How could I be happy with that? I'm an adventuresome guy. I'm looking at the world through my glasses, not yours, and I don't care about what you do. I mean, it's not affecting me in jealousy. I'm not a jealous guy. I envy people. I do have envy. I have pride, but I don't have jealousy. I don't want to be anybody. I think it's an interesting time to make your own kind of painting.
Well, with that in mind, Joey Reynolds, you're so kind to come and sit here and chat with us, and thanks to Randy, who is always such a helpful participant in these, but today pulled more than your oar.
Well, you're going to pull my membership out of the Pacific group now?
And I appreciate that. So thank you so much.
You're welcome.